Lucille Ball was drinking bad coffee in a roadside diner outside Newark when a young waitress dropped a plate of eggs on the floor for the third time that morning, and Lucy watched the girl's hands start to shake in a way that had nothing to do with the eggs. What Lucy did in the next 20 minutes didn't make the newspapers, and the girl whose life changed because of it didn't know who had changed it until 3 weeks later when a letter arrived that began with 4 words nobody had ever said to her before. It was a Tuesday morning in March 1972, and the flight from Newark to Los Angeles had been delayed 3 hours due to weather, which left Lucy with time she hadn't planned to have and no particular place to spend it. Oh, the airport coffee was worse than usual, and the terminal was crowded with the specific chaos of delayed flights and redirected passengers, and Lucy had been traveling long enough to know that sometimes the best response to a delay is to leave the building entirely. She found the diner a quarter-mile from the airport on a service road that ran parallel to the runway. It was called Marlene's, hand-painted sign, vinyl booths, the kind of place that had been serving the same menu since 1958 and saw no reason to change it now. A bell rang when she pushed the door open. The morning shift was in progress, the smell of coffee and bacon grease and the particular mustiness of a space that opens at 5 in the morning every day and has done so for 14 years. Well, Lucy took a booth near the window where she could see the planes taking off in the distance. A waitress appeared almost immediately, young, maybe 19, with dark hair pulled back and the kind of nervous energy that comes from being new at something and aware that everyone is watching to see if you can do it. Her name tag said Ellen. Lucy ordered coffee and scrambled eggs, toast, no butter. Ellen wrote it down with the careful precision of someone who is writing everything down because they haven't yet learned what needs to be written down and what can be remembered. She said she'd be right back and turned toward the kitchen, and that's when Lucy noticed the way her hands were shaking slightly as she held the order pad. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else in the diner would have noticed. But Lucy had spent 40 years watching people perform under pressure, and she knew the specific quality of nerves that comes from being afraid of making a mistake in front of people who are waiting for you to make one. Ellen came back with the coffee. The cup rattled slightly in the saucer when she set it down. Lucy thanked her. Ellen nodded and turned to go, and that's when the sound came from the kitchen. A man's voice, loud enough to carry through the serving window, but not loud enough for the words to be distinct. Just the tone, which was the tone of someone who is angry and wants the person they're angry at to know it. Ellen's shoulders went up slightly. She walked faster toward the kitchen, and Lucy poured cream into her coffee and watched the cream spiral and disappear, and thought about the specific weight of that tone and what it does to a person who is already afraid. The eggs came 12 minutes later. They were scrambled, as ordered, but they came with a side of bacon that Lucy hadn't asked for. Ellen set the plate down and said, "I'm sorry, I'll take the bacon back," and Lucy said, "It's fine, leave it." And Ellen said, "Are you sure?" And Lucy said, "Yes." Ellen left. Lucy ate the eggs. They were overcooked in the way that diner eggs are often overcooked, the edges slightly brown, but they were fine. The bacon was crisp. The toast was cold. None of it mattered in the way that breakfast in a roadside diner doesn't matter except as fuel and a place to sit while time passes. She was halfway through the eggs when she heard the crash. It came from the other side of the diner, near the counter, the sound of ceramic hitting linoleum and breaking. Lucy looked up. Ellen was standing in the middle of the floor with pieces of a plate around her feet, and a man in a white apron, the manager presumably, was standing in the kitchen doorway looking at her with an expression that Lucy recognized immediately as the expression of someone who has been waiting for an excuse. The diner went quiet in the way that public spaces go quiet when something is broken and everyone wants to see what happens next. Ellen bent down and started picking up the pieces. Her hands were shaking badly now, badly enough that Lucy could see it from across the room. The manager said something. Lucy couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone, which was the tone of someone who is being deliberately loud so that everyone can hear that they are being reasonable while saying something that is not reasonable at all. Ellen stood up with the pieces in her hands and her face was red, and she was not crying, but she was close to it. She walked toward the kitchen. The manager stepped aside to let her pass and said something else as she went by, something that made Ellen's shoulders go up again in that same defensive way they had gone up before. Lucy set down her fork. She had been in rooms with directors who spoke to actors that way. She had been in meetings with network executives who spoke to writers that way. She had, in the early years before she learned how to prevent it, been spoken to that way herself. She knew what it did. She knew what it cost. And she knew, watching Ellen disappear into the kitchen with pieces of broken plate in her shaking hands, that whatever was happening in that girl's life outside this diner, this job was not helping. Ellen came back out 2 minutes later with a broom and dustpan. She swept up the remaining pieces with her head down and her movements quick and small, like she was trying to be invisible. When she finished, she took the dustpan to the kitchen and came back out and went to a table near the window where an older couple was waiting for their check. Lucy watched her take their money to the register. She watched her come back with their change. She watched her clear their table after they left, stacking plates with the same careful precision she had used to write down Lucy's order. And she watched her carry the stack toward the kitchen, and she saw the moment, just before Ellen reached the kitchen door, when the top plate started to slide. Ellen caught it. Barely. With a movement that was more reflex than skill, jerking her hands up to stop the slide, and the whole stack wobbled but held, and Ellen made it through the kitchen door without dropping anything. But Lucy had seen her face in the moment before she caught it. She had seen the fear, the specific fear of someone who knows they cannot afford another mistake, and who has just come within inches of making one. Lucy finished her eggs. She drank her coffee. She sat in the booth and looked out the window at the planes taking off, and she thought about the girl with the shaking hands and the manager who was waiting for her to fail, and the particular cruelty of a system that puts people in positions where fear is the primary motivator and then punishes them for being afraid. Ellen came back to refill Lucy's coffee. Lucy thanked her. Ellen nodded and started to turn away, and Lucy said, "Wait." Ellen stopped. She turned back. She had the expression of someone who is expecting bad news and is preparing to receive it professionally. Lucy said, "Sit down." Ellen looked at her. "I can't," she said. "My manager will see me." Lucy said, "Sit down anyway." Ellen looked toward the kitchen. She looked at Lucy. She looked at the empty booth across from Lucy, and she made a decision that Lucy could see happening in real time, the weighing of risks, the choice between two kinds of trouble. She sat down. Lucy said, "How long have you been working here?" Ellen said, "This is my first week." Lucy said, "You're doing fine." Ellen's eyes filled. Not crying, not yet, but close. She said, "I keep dropping things." Lucy said, "Everyone drops things. I dropped things for 40 years on television, and they kept paying me to come back." Ellen almost smiled. Not quite. But almost. She said, "I don't think my manager sees it that way." Lucy said, "I know." Lucy paused. She said, "Why do you need this job?" Ellen looked at her. It was the look of someone deciding whether to tell the truth to a stranger. She said, "My mother is in the hospital. We can't pay the electric bill. I'm trying to save enough to keep the lights on." Lucy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's wrong with your mother?" Ellen said, "Pneumonia." "She's getting better, but she can't work yet." Lucy said, "How old are you?" Ellen said, 19. Lucy said, "Are you in school?" Ellen said, "I was. I had to stop." She paused. "I was studying to be a teacher." Lucy looked at her. She looked at this 19-year-old girl with shaking hands and a sick mother and a manager who was waiting for her to fail and an education that had stopped because the electric bill mattered more, and she felt something that she had felt many times before in different contexts, the specific anger that comes from watching someone be punished for circumstances they did not create. She said, "Ellen, I want you to listen to me." And Ellen looked at her. Lucy said, "You are going to stop dropping things. Not today. Maybe not this week, but soon. You are going to learn this job, and you are going to be good at it because you are already working harder than anyone else in this building, and hard work compounds. Do you understand?" Ellen nodded. Lucy said, "And your mother is going to get better, and you are going to go back to school because teachers matter, and you are going to be a good one." Ellen's eyes filled again. She said, "How do you know?" Lucy said, "Because I have been watching you for 20 minutes, and I know the difference between someone who is bad at something and someone who is scared of being bad at something. You are the second one. The second one can be fixed." Ellen wiped her eyes. She said, "Thank you." Lucy said, "Don't thank me. Just stop being scared of your manager. He's scared too. That's why he yells." Ellen looked toward the kitchen. She said, "I should get back." Lucy said, "Yes, you should." Ellen stood up. She hesitated. She said, "I don't know your name." Lucy said, "Lucille Ball." Ellen stared at her. "You're Lucille Ball." Lucy said, "I am." Ellen said, "I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry." Lucy said, "Don't be sorry. It's nice to just be a person sometimes." Ellen went back to work. Lucy finished her coffee. She paid her check and left a tip that was 40% of the bill, which was high, but not so high that it would seem like charity. She walked back to the airport and caught her flight, and she did not mention the girl in the diner to anyone. 3 weeks later, she was in her office in Los Angeles when her assistant came in with a piece of paper. Lucy's lawyer had called. There was a hospital bill from Newark that needed to be paid. Lucy looked at the amount. She told her assistant to pay it and to include a note. The note said, "Ellen, stop dropping things. You're going to be fine. The hardest part is behind you." She signed it. L.B. Ellen Marsh received the letter on a Thursday afternoon in April when she came home from her shift at Marlene's to find it waiting in the mailbox of the apartment she shared with her mother, who was home from the hospital now and getting stronger every day. She opened the envelope standing in the hallway. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Los Angeles informing her that an anonymous benefactor had paid her mother's hospital bill in full. Attached to the letter was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery that said what it said and was signed with 2 initials that Ellen stared at for a long time before she understood what they meant. She sat down on the floor in the hallway and cried, not from sadness, from the specific overwhelming relief that comes when someone you don't know decides that your problem matters enough to fix, even though they will never see you again and will never know if it worked. Ellen kept the note. She taped it to the mirror in her bedroom where she saw it every morning for the next 2 years while she worked at Marlene's and saved money and applied to schools. She got into Montclair State. She studied education. She graduated in 1976. She taught high school English for 33 years in Newark Public Schools. She kept the note the entire time. When she retired in 2009, she had it framed. It hangs in her living room now between a photograph of her mother, who lived to be 86, and a photograph of her first classroom. People ask her about it sometimes. She tells them the same story every time. She tells them about the diner and the dropped plates and the woman who told her to sit down and then changed her life with a hospital bill and a note that said, "The hardest part is behind you." She tells them that she didn't know who Lucille Ball was that morning. She knew later. Everyone knew later. But that morning in the diner, she was just a woman drinking bad coffee who noticed that someone needed help and decided to help them. Ellen says that's the part she thinks about most. Not the money, though the money mattered. Not the fame, and though the fame made the story easier to tell. But the noticing. The fact that someone looked at her closely enough to see that she was scared and then cared enough to do something about it. She says, if you want to know what it means to be Lucille Ball, not the actress, but the person, start there. Start with someone who notices. The rest follows from that. If this story reminded you that the most powerful thing you can do for another person is see them when they feel invisible, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification bell. More stories about who these legends really